Hi. Thank you for that intermission there.
Yeah, you're welcome, bro.
I don't know if I got a chance to read this, but really it's a pretty good summary of moral relativism. It's saying because whatever viewpoint you take, whatever moral stance you take, that's only for your culture or for your time and place. You can't force that on me. And so he's taking it to extremes and talking about New Year's resolutions and saying, well, you're trying to enforce your values on me by forcing me to make New Year's resolutions. And because of that, I refuse to do that because it's all relative. It doesn't matter because I can have my own values and you can have your own values. Right? Funny way to say that. Here we go. Another comment I kind of like is this one up here. It's a lawyer talking to the judge saying, my client pleads not guilty because reasons of cultural relativism. So think about it like if the idea is if you left this country, went to another country, and you broke their laws, the thought is, well, it's not my culture, so I didn't break any laws. It's your culture, and so it's your problem kind of thing. I'll just read this kind of definition of it. Moral relativism rejects the idea that there can be universal criteria for determining values. All value systems are thought to be actually originated and conditioned. So it's more of a conditioning process of like you were born into a culture and you were raised in that, so you believe it because of that, not necessarily because it's true. And hence, all cultural ethical systems are equally valid. There is no system out there that is better than any other system. They're all equal to each other. There's nothing special or better about any particular culture or any particular set of moral values. So a lot of people, they tend to argue is like, don't change someone else's culture. Don't bring your morality into someone else's culture because their morality is equivalent to yours in that they're on the same footing. There's nothing better or worse about either of yours. They're just different. So it's kind of a frustrating thought process to deal with, but it also kind of falls flat in that. If you think about it this way, what if the Nazis during World War II had taken over the world, which would be horrible if that happened, but it did, and so they passed laws saying it's okay to kill Jews. We don't like them. We think they're scum of the earth. Get rid of all of them. Would it be morally wrong to do that then? Think about it, they've changed all the laws, and it's cultural for them, and they've established themselves all over the world, so they're not necessarily changing anyone's culture, they've established culture. But for anyone living in that time, would it be morally wrong for them to do that? And that's kind of when you get some internal struggle there, because I would argue most people, if not everyone, knows that would be wrong. Like, especially in the US, they'd be like, yes, that should not happen. But if you believe in moral relativism, how would you argue against it? Good thought?
Yeah, if you argue for moral relativism, what you were saying is that it requires that each value system has to be independent from the other and uniquely different to be considered equal. So if the laws of the world are now culturally universal, how would that be conditioned under relativism because you can't compare it against anything else? So legally it would be a no, but you're right, how do you argue the morals on it? But I don't see the case for how it's moral relativism if they now create a universal structure across the world, basically.
Right. So yeah, legally there wouldn't be any problem with doing that. But I would say that most people would know inherently that's wrong. And so how do you argue and say, I know this is wrong and this is why it's wrong in that specific scenario?
Right. But how do you measure if all of the laws across the world are now under a universal umbrella? How do you argue a comparison or equal value systems and cultures that are outside of that? Because we're now talking about a situation that everything's the same.
Right.
So legally, take morals out of it on that front, legally everything's the same. There's nothing to compare it against.
Right.
So morally right or wrong on that, it can't be moral relativism because it's now a blanket for everything, right?
I think the issue actually with, like, especially in this case, is we are in our own cultural moral. Like, we have our, like, example, while we would agree with it, one might argue we agree with it because that was the cultural, the moral culture that we grew up in. So the issue with this is that how do you make any objective? Like, how would they come and say, oh, it's wrong not to kill them, right? It's like there is no way to do cross-cultural, like comparisons at all.
Right.
Like unless you have someone who's part of no culture, but
Right.
that's
It
a
doesn't
culture of
exist.
individual.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's like,
The lack thereof.
it's like there is no way to actually. So like, I think the issue with this is just like, how do you compare it?
Yeah, it's not measurable.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I don't know, I had a friend kind of sloppily phrase it once that, in different cultures it might be an insult to someone if you crossed your legs late at the dinner table, but in every culture, it's typically frowned upon if you kick a baby. That's not relative, that's pretty absolute, yeah.
Right, so we'll make it even, we'll run with Blake's idea.
Run with kicking the baby,
All
let's
right,
do it.
so Nazis have taken over the world, they say you can kill all Jews. So they say, all the babies, go out and torture them, do whatever you want, you can do it for fun. Most people are going to kick back and say, that is not right. And they're just going to know that inherently, I would argue. Now you could say that's our culture, but I would say that would be a pretty universal thing.
Yeah.
I think you could actually argue, even from different other philosophical reasons, like, okay, even if we are just animals, right? Okay, animals have a tendency to inherently protect their young, and that is
Mothers do.
Mothers do, sure.
The fathers are often known to try and kill the infant because they aren't able to reproduce with them if they're in heat again and they're pregnant. And some animals, like elephants, are pregnant for 20 months. So the fathers are actually more likely to kill the baby. And so my question on this is, if we're going to go into that, the baby example, if it's not your child, and we go based off of the earlier discussion with utilitarianism where love is based on the value that it can provide, if it's not your child, is it still morally wrong? Because the case we're making is for if we love our own child, but if it's his child, what stops me from killing that child?
Right.
If that's sucking down my resources and everything else, what stops me from it?
Yeah.
Because now if we go off the advantages, that's beneficial to me,
Right.
has no benefit to anyone else, and I can get further, take something out.
Right.
Aircraft has an observation.
Okay.
I feel like one of the things that's like hurting us in this conversation, we're talking about the past. We need to talk about the present because there's a lot of issues of moral relativism. Like, I mean, to one example, in Afghanistan now, it's illegal for women to be educated, and I think in the U.S. we see that as being morally wrong. But if you go to Afghanistan, that's not morally wrong. So that's an example of does the fact that Afghanistan believes that it is not morally wrong to leave women uneducated and thus susceptible to abuse because of that? Like, does that mean that's equally valid as us being like, no, women should be educated?
And that was like, that distinction is kind of what I was trying to point out. Like, it is inherently subjective. Like, the way I'm interpreting moral relativism is that it is subjective to each culture. Like, in order to have moral relativism, you'd have to have some level of global morals, which is, again, just going back to this argument of objective morality. And it's interesting this one brought up that people might bring this up as objective morals, because inherently that means there's a plurality of morals. And that makes it, not objective.
Out of everything we've been through so far, this seems like the most, we can see the most visible flaw here of how blatantly circular reasoning based this is here. And it's just we just get nowhere ultimately with it of whatever the determined relative morals or law is of the society. Just the opposing defendant party can always just claim, as the cartoon says that they're not guilty by relativism, and it's just whatever side it is, it can just always just be a back and forth game of that. So it's this exposes the blatant weakness. I feel like of this argument very much by that point.
Sure, yeah, I can point out if you are a moral, or if you claim to be a moral relativist, you don't necessarily have to have God to exist. You don't necessarily have to have God to like live a moral life, if you will. But if you do want to claim to have objective morality, so if you want to claim that yes, killing babies for fun or torturing babies for fun is objectively wrong and evil, you have to have a creator. So this is kind of driving a wedge in like the two different theologies, if you will. You can, like I said, you can have a logically consistent belief that there is no objective morality, so there is no God, and you can live your life. The thing is, most people are not comfortable living like that. I found that young men who are not married or don't have any kids are the most likely to claim to believe one of these viewpoints that we're talking about. My former coworkers, they're the ones that I've talked about. They are ones that have claimed these viewpoints. But the thing is, it's extremely difficult to stay logically consistent with these viewpoints. What do I mean by that? So, Richard Dawkins, one of the more famous atheists and Darwinian supporters, and a funny example just to give is that he'll claim more, I don't know about moral relativism, but he'd probably lean more towards nihilism / maybe Sam Harris kind of viewpoint. I'm not exactly sure, but he'd say basically morals are relative. It's something we've created. It's not necessarily objective. It's not necessarily something that you can say applies to everyone for all times. But in the same breath, he'll turn around and say, that was not a fair game of cricket. They broke the rules. Why does it matter, Richard Dawkins, what happened on that field? Why does it matter anything about the rules? There is no objective truth. There is no objective morality, per se. And so what they did on the field, it just happened. They were just dancing to their DNA, to use his paraphrase, or to use his phrase. They were just doing whatever felt natural to them. And you can't argue that they did anything wrong, necessarily. You can say that goes against the rules of the game, but what does that matter when they're living out their purely naturalistic desires? And so I would say for anyone who claims any of these viewpoints, just realize that if you want to go by that, then there's no objective morality. Then anything bad that happens to you that's not evil, it's not necessarily even wrong, it's just something you don't like. It's just something other people don't like, maybe.
Or it's all up to perspective, yeah.
I think this one's the most relevant to our culture today, because I hear all the time, that's your truth and this is my
Yeah.
truth.
Right.
And that's what this is.
Yeah, that's what this is going back to. Like, again, this is something people don't like thinking about. In that, yes, we go back to the Nazi example. Like, there would be no argument in that world based on moral relativism that anything was wrong. You just have to be something you would live with. But if that does bother you, then that might give you an inkling that there is objective morality. I've kind of worked my way through this thought process, and just for me personally, I realized that it would be extremely difficult for me to actually live out like nihilism or moral relativism, because it's just so difficult to like say, oh no, what happened to you? It just happens. Just people dancing to their DNA just because they want to do something mean to you or they want to do something evil. It doesn't really matter. You know, kids shooting up a school, that's just happens. Things like that, bad things happen. Like I can't call anything evil at that point. And so that would be very difficult for me. Now that doesn't necessarily prove God, obviously, because there's other proofs that we're going to go through that are a little bit more solid on that one. I'm just saying that if you believe in objective morality, you have to have something to point back to, and to live a life that won't like send me into a downward spiral. I would say I need some sort of objective morality. Again, that doesn't prove God exists, but it also is logically consistent that if you're going to live with objective morals, then there is a creator. Hopefully that answers your questions. Do y'all have any more you want to ask or anything?
I think I'm ready for the next slide.
Okay. All right. one thing that I do like to just when you're having discussions with people, is that they'll say, you have your truth and I have my truth, and
Yeah.
I'll be like, is that objectively true?
That's what I mean. It's all just wordplay after a certain
So,
point.
it's something to think about. People, they'll say, like, you can't enforce your morals on me. I'm like, is that objectively true? Because you're enforcing your morals on me.
Yeah, it's.
So, it's just good things to make people think, again, like asking questions versus making statements, and so make people think about what they're saying and stuff like that.
It's less combative as well.
Yeah, less combative.
Good point.
So, all right, so this one, I thought this one was kind of funny. Materialists. So these are people who deny that the non-material world exists. I would say this is very extreme of a position, but there are some out there, so we're going to talk about them a little bit. They deny that your soul exists and that your consciousness exists. By consciousness, I mean your mind. So we've got your brain and your mind. It's got a common definition. Your brain is your physical brain inside your head. Your mind is the non-material kind of thinking, everything about you kind of thing. That's at least how we're going to define it. So Francis Crick, he attempted to make an explanation for materialists. He says, your joys, your sorrows, your memories, and your ambitions, your sense of personal identity and free will are all in fact no more than behavior of a vast assembly of nerves and cells and associated molecules.
Nice.
Yes.
Is this the Nobel guy? DNA guy?
I think this is someone different. I could be wrong, but I'm not 100% sure on that. So this guy, he's denying anything that's not material exists, which we start getting into a lot of different issues, and also we could talk about this for an hour alone on that one, so we're going to hit it pretty high level. So while you might feel like all your decisions are made on your own free will, in reality, this is just chemical reactions happening, and that's causing you to do things. So you're not actually making a decision. It was already pre-programmed into you that you would react a certain way. And so really, if you think about it, our whole justice system is built on people having free will and having to be able to choose and make moral decisions. But really, if materialism is true, then everything is just a material response or a chemical response to the situation. You're not making any decisions, you're just reacting, and because that's how you're conditioned and how your body reacts to things. So it takes morality out of the picture. You're denying that there's anything non-material to you, and so that's how they try and get around morality. However, a lot of people struggle with that, especially with saying that they don't have free will. That's a big issue for a lot of people. And if you do think you have free will, then this is going to go against what you believe. So basically, what happens from materialism is determinism. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in here. Their phone's okay there? All right. I thought this one was pretty funny on the comics too, about Kermit there. So determinism. Yeah.
So morals feeling bad for an animal that doesn't exist.
Right. So determinism is no material aspect to you, according to Crick. Again, your entire thought process is simply chemical reactions. Non-material ideas such as the mind don't exist. When we talk about it, again, you can't be held for your actions. They're all chemical reactions, so really we should put no one in jail because they're all just acting according to their chemical reactions. They had no choice in the matter. It was their condition to be that way, and so why even bother trying to stop them? You're no more than the chemicals and water that you're composed of. So if we had every chemical and all the water that makes up a human being in a bag, it'd be the equivalent of you. Like that's how materialism views it, which is a very harsh way to think about it. But the funny thing is, this logic breaks down. So if you think about it, everything that you believe, you're pre-programmed to believe. It has nothing to do whether it's true or not. You are pre-programmed to believe everything that you believe. So even materialists, they're pre-programmed to believe that materialism is true. So it's not necessarily objectively true. It's just something that they're pre-programmed to believe, and that everyone else is pre-programmed to believe whatever they believe. So there's really no point in changing people's minds, but there is no objective truth on that, because we're all pre-programmed to believe something, and we can't change that about ourselves. So y'all see where the logic breaks down there?
Yeah. Can I just kind of add on to this through personal experience?
Sure.
So I have a really good friend of mine I've known since I was very young. He is a self-pronounced determinist. He's admitted that it's not because he is this iron faith in what determinism prescribes, and he doesn't do it to escape personal accountability. It's just how he makes sense of the world and why things happen the way they happen. So beyond just believing, your decisions and your actions are part of your brain, the way I kind of gleaned it from him is that everything that happens in life is an extended series of cause and effects. That the way the world plays out is just a very long chain of dominoes falling down on each other.
Right.
So for example, I was telling him that learning to play this card game that he and I both play has allowed me to meet these really incredible people that I wouldn't have met otherwise. It led me to getting my first job at college, which has now led me to become a recruiter, which is now, because of my work experience, allowed me to go to grad school. So I believe very much in the paths of things.
Right.
Whereas he said, if I were to meet someone in a coffee shop who plays the same games, I wouldn't think anything of it. It would just imagine he and I both play this game, which means we're probably in the same income bracket, which means we live in this neighborhood, which means this coffee shop is nearby. This is on a Saturday afternoon where most people seem to get coffee to charge up for the day. That sort of thing. I'm kind of butchering the explanation here, but determinism is more than just, brain chemicals. It's everything in life is an effect of some other cause, and it's an endless chain. Does that kind of track?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
You're really saying everything has a explainable cause, if you will.
Yeah, there's no deeper meaning or deeper understanding to be gleaned from any coincidence.
Right, yeah, for sure.
Every action is a result of the previous events.
Yeah,
Right. And you are no more than the sum of what you're made up of.
precisely.
So, which, again, you can live that lifestyle and you can believe that, but it's very depressing, and there's no purpose for you, and again, morality gets thrown out the window because there's nothing to say anything's evil at that point. Thanks for sharing with me. All right.
Philosopher after.
Yeah. So now we're going to talk about some everybody's favorite, some Greek philosophers and what their thought process on some of this is. A lot of times people, especially, have to struggle with pain and suffering, so we're going to look at two in particular that kind of talk about that a little bit. And this is to point out that this is not something new. This is something that philosophers have been talking about for thousands of years. This predates Jesus even, so this is not like a big thought that's just come out of nowhere. We've been thinking about this and been able to walk through what we believe on this one. For those who are unfamiliar with Euthyphro, I have a hard time pronouncing that one too. He's a character from one of Plato's books. He came up with this thought. Does God do something because it is good, which would imply there is a standard of good beyond God? Or is it good because God does it, which would imply that God arbitrarily makes up morality?
Is it arbitrary if God's doing it though? Wait.
Right. It takes on a non-Christian viewpoint of God, I would say that. So it's asking, is there something outside of God that is objectively moral? Or is because God says it's moral, it is moral?
Mm.
So, did you have a question?
No, sorry, I was just switching. Well, I would make the statement that, just from a Christian standpoint, that it's not that God makes the decision of what is good. God is good.
He is the
Right, he is
measure.
the definition.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
So,
And really, he's creating a false dilemma here. Because this is not operating off of what who God truly is. It's putting out two false possibilities from a Christian perspective. So we'll talk about that here. So here's a Christian in response to the youth furrow, again, struggle with the name. Have any of y'all ever heard of gotquestions.org before? Yeah. It's a great resource. Highly recommend using it if you ever got questions on things. Honestly, they do a great job on answering it because there's no good option from the two options he offered. So as Christians, we would present a third option. We would say, we affirm both God's sovereignty and his non-derived goodness. So God didn't just become good one day, and there is nothing outside of God that, like some sort of moral standard that exists outside of him. It's all from him. So thus, we don't want a standard that is arbitrary, nor one that exists above God. Fortunately, God is both supremely sovereign and good. Therefore, God's nature in himself can serve as the standard of goodness. So it is something that comes from him. And we know that God is not changing. And so he is not capricious. It's not something that's going to change from day to day or depending on how we feel. Yeah. God is not, a lot of Greek philosophy tends to make gods into more human-like characters, and they have these, go through bouts of anger and all this kind of stuff where they give them emotions that are not, should not be applied to God. And so that God, since he is never changing, which I could list a lot of verses for that, but again, we're staying away from using the Bible at this point. God does not change, so his nature is what determines what is good. And because it doesn't change, it's not arbitrary, it's objective at that point. So, yeah. So that solves the question from Euphoro. Really, again, he presents two false dilemmas. A lot of people don't really realize that this has been already answered, and so a lot of times they'll bring up this in conversations if they have some kind of idea about it. Just understand that they're going to give you two false scenarios, so you got to come up with your third option. And the third option is there's nothing, just think of it this way, there's nothing outside of God, so the objective standard outside of him is false, and then he is unchanging. Because he is unchanging, he is the ultimate standard, and that is where we get our standard from inside of God. Any questions on that? I know I struggle sometimes trying to explain
That was
this.
pretty good.
So now we're going to talk about a different Greek philosopher here. We're going to talk about Epicurus.
Oh, wow. That was
Yeah. They have some interesting transitions on here. All right, so this one I've struggled with this a lot as far as evil goes. I wrote a paper on it just because it is so important to me, and but I think this is a good question to ask at least. So it goes like this: is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he is not omnipotent. Is he able but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Then whence come evil? Is he neither able nor willing? Then why call him God? So think about how we answer this. So he's saying, is God not willing to stop evil? Seems kind of strange. Why would he not be willing to stop that? If he's not willing, then he's not omnipotent. If he is willing, but he's not able to, then he's not all-powerful. So if he is willing and he is powerful enough to do it, then why do we have evil? So if we have evil, then there must be no God. There's a little bit of faulty logic in there, so we'll talk about that. God is capable of stopping evil. He's unwilling to stop evil. God must not exist because evil does. I just thought that was funny. Alright. So here's how I would go about answering Epicurus. But are really these the only three options for his question? To quickly address the last one, that there is no God because there's evil. There is no religion in the entire world that says pain and suffering is not a part of life. So it shows that his point of saying that because there's evil, God doesn't exist, there is no religion that claims that. There's no religion that claims that there will be no pain and suffering or there will be no evil in life. So he's making a false, I would say, accusation at that point. No one really believes that there's going to be no pain and suffering in this world, and every religion is accepting that fact and still has a God. So there's a disconnect on his questioning there. But another quote that I like is, to attribute this somehow disqualifies the belief in the existence of a deity is not intellectually honest, as it is not a representative of any claim of theism, belief in one God, or polytheism. But think about it this way. If we really didn't have pain and suffering in anyone's life at all, like, what kind of life would that be? You never had to struggle to succeed in anything. Would you really be able to enjoy your successes as much?
How God like made me in the garden to work it. He
Right.
didn't put me in just to do nothing.
Yeah. I know for me, like, the times I've been, I guess, most excited about succeeding is when I have failed before, or I've had to really struggle to get to where I am. Because if you think about it, like, struggling through something makes you appreciate more what you have. If you came from nothing financially and then you were able to work your way until you were rich or something, aren't you going to enjoy more of the things that you have versus maybe your kids who were just born into having money or something like that? That's one way to think about it. Also, Epicurus, interestingly, never defines evil. So he's saying there's no God, but how do you come up with evil at that point? You have to have some objective moral standard to judge and say, that is evil. But if there's no God, there's no objective moral standard. Question?
Yeah, so we've asked the question, what is considered evil, but what do we define as evil then? Because we've talked about evil this entire presentation. What is it?
Right. From a Christian perspective, we would refer back to the Bible and the moral law. I would say the moral law is something that's written on your heart as far as what you believe. You could refer to the Ten Commandments would be a good start for that one. Obviously, the New Testament is a fulfillment of the Old Testament, and I would argue takes the law to a further degree, even beyond what any human, non-God person could do. But there's grace in there that abounds for us, thankfully, so we don't have to keep the law anymore. But we do, I would say the Bible would be our basis for morality at that point. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yes.
So I kind of struggled with the whole idea of if there's no struggle or pain suffered in life at all, would that be a life worth living? Because, when God first created the world, there was no struggle or pain, and that's like, the new creation, there will be no struggle or pain. So it's like, that makes it seem like, in heaven, like, life won't be worth living if we attribute our life is worth living because, like, we're able to enjoy the good without the suffering. And I've been told, like, in the new creation, we won't even remember. I don't know if that's actually like in the Bible, but I've been told that. So it's like, how can we really, like, this is arguing, like, how can we really enjoy the good stuff without the knowledge of pain? But God didn't intend for pain to ever exist.
True. Right. He did create the world perfectly. I would argue he knew it was going to happen to begin with, so in theory it was part of his plan. Really, I could lecture like a whole night just doing pain and suffering. I think there are 7 different reasons that God allows pain and suffering in this world. The biggest one is for the overarching reason, I would say, is for us to realize our humanity, realize that we were not meant to live this way in like a fallen world, and that we need a savior. We need someone to come in and save us, or save us from our sins at least, and realize that this is not eternity here. We're on the short end of eternity, if you will. That being said, that's not the only reason that we have pain and suffering. We also have pain and suffering because, I would argue, we have free will. Because we have free will, people have the opportunity to do evil. If God, and this goes along with this thought too, if God stopped everyone from doing evil the minute it happened, like, where would that start? And from a Christian perspective, we would say it starts with all of us. Because we've all sinned at some point in our life. We've all done evil. And then you ask the question, well, where do you draw the line at that point? And that's getting back to the question of how do you define evil? Everyone's going to have a different answer, I would say. But according to the Christian perspective, everyone has sinned, everyone has done something evil. And so then you have to wipe everyone off according to that. And then, but Epicurus, he doesn't define it for us, so we have no idea what he's referencing to evil at that point. We can have some general idea, but you're drawing the line in the sand at that point. Do you have a question, Daniel?
Well, I was gonna say, maybe this might help answer. I'd say we have a different perspective now. Part of the curse, so to speak, is our own flesh, the bodies in heaven, which we won't have in heaven.
Right, we have a fallen nature.
So, like, that's what we know on this earth. It'll be different in heaven. So, we can't base it like, whether if there is no pain or suffering, if life will be worth living, based off of our state as it currently is.
Yeah, this whole question kind of implies that you have to assert some level of personal perspective on this. It's like, well, why does God let evil happen? Well, okay. Who are you to say that evil should or shouldn't happen, right? Like, what is God's ultimate purpose? Do you know? Do I know? Right? It's like, I very much agree with like the free will argument as one of many, but I think it is a kindness in a way just to allow us to have free will, right?
So on that point, I'm going to tag on. Everybody struggles with this question: why do bad things happen to good people? Why is there pain and suffering? When I was a teenager and I went to a Christian camp, exactly to your point, the answer I was given for like why are people allowed to do injustice to other people was the idea that if God came down and stopped a man from committing murder, at that point in time we would all become machines. We would no longer have free will.
So I have something.
Sure.
So I was raised Presbyterian, which is kind of near Calvinism, which is basically free will doesn't exist.
Exciting.
And I mean, I hate when I like do kind of talk morality with like other people. I try to avoid the free will argument because I don't know how I can argue. I don't know if free will exists or not, and I don't have a strong enough understanding of what the Bible says about that to use the free will argument. I obviously want to say we have free will, but I hate people being like, oh, but predestination, and if God exists at a time, then he already knows what's going to happen.
Oh, isn't it
so
wonderful to think about? Yeah.
So
we could talk
I
about
just,
all that.
I don't know, that might be getting us in a tangent, you don't have to answer, but I have such,
Follow on discussions.
It's good. It's good.
I'm so for that discussion.
Next summer, we'll do that.
Just so everybody
Just keep it going to August. I'm down for it. Let's go.
Lance has written a terrific multi-page thesis about the nature of pain and suffering. He can email it to you if you drop your email to him.
That's
I'm
not
volunteering that for you, but I've read the essay and it's really good. It helped me a lot too.
Do you have a question, Lauren?
I was wondering if we could open up this can of worms because I'm on the page with Mary Catherine here. I super believe in predestination, obviously the Bible says so. But then also, it is such a kindness, so
can I, because I actually have spent a lot of time thinking
if
about
that's
this.
okay with Lance,
So,
yes.
If omniscience, right, there can be determinism,
Okay.
right? Like, if God is omnipotent, I think there can be deterministic paths, right? But that's still like, so the way I think Frank Turek actually talked about it was like, you're on a boat from like New York to London, right? That's the journey. You have the free will to go anywhere on that boat, right? But you know your beginning, you know your end, and you know all the things that can happen on the boat, right? So like from God's perspective, he like it is deterministic because this happens, this happens, this happens. But it happens because these people who are operating under free will interact with these and cause emergent phenomena in a way, like these emergent actions with other people. It's like, oh, this person is here at this time, which causes this person to have this, right? They are all operating under free will, but God is still omniscient, and that is still deterministic because those people are there at that point. That's kind of, when we were talking about determinism in a way, it's like, I still actually kind of do believe a little bit in determinism, but from more like, but a determinism based in the objective morality of God, right? So it's like, I believe that we all are operating on personal, individual free will as we perceive it, right? But it is kind of, we are our own people, and we are put in in certain situations, predestined by God, to have different interactions that do lead us into a specific line of life. But ultimately, I think the question, this is my personal perspective, the question of life in itself, what is the purpose of life, is, do I believe in God? Do I believe in Jesus Christ, right? Like, that's what I personally believe the whole point of Earth is, was like, okay, I'm going to make that one singular, or make a determination on that one singular point. So, to me, it's, you know, the predestination is a lot of, you know, putting you in situations to confront that question over your lifetime and make that choice out of free will. But from God's perspective, he's outside of time. There is no, like, he's not waiting for you to make a decision. He knows what you're going to do. But he, like, there is still these sequence of events that put you in the situation that eventually ultimately leads to you deciding yes or no. And that's not like a distinct moment of yes or no, right? People have a whole lifetime, and they're like, you know, people go back and forth. And so, like, that's why I think it's kind of a, for me, I think of it as being an outside of time kind of, not like a inside of time. I've made a decision. Like, one of the questions, and this can go way longer, I'm not going to go too much on it, but like, can you lose salvation? Right? That's one of the other things is like, yeah, can you lose salvation? Well, some people argue, right? Well, did you have it in the first place, right? It's like, but then this comes into the idea of time, right? And God is outside of time. He is infinite, he's eternal, right? So he is outside of time. So he has a non-time corresponding determination of, do you follow Christ, right? So, yeah, there's a whole,
Yeah. I would say, I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, just because we could spend all night talking about I will hang around after this is over if you want to talk more and talk more about whatever y'all want to talk about on that one, so feel free to ask
You
questions.
can ask Lance, he's on mission.
Yeah. So, I'll make one final comment about that. So I believe God knows everything that's going to happen. He's already seen it, he's already known what's going to happen. Just because he knows what's going to happen doesn't mean that he necessarily forced you to make any decisions.
Mm-hmm.
So here's one way I like to think of it. So I wrote a book, and it has characters in there, it has a plot. I am outside of the book. Like, I don't live in the book. I am outside of that timeline, if you will. So I have written the book, already finished it, it has an end, I know how it ends. That doesn't necessarily mean the characters are forced to do something. I know how they're going to react, and so I've built situations so they reacted a certain way. But like, nothing necessarily forced the characters. I know it's a little bit of a stretch analogy, but that's how I think of it.
There's things going on between the chapters. Yeah.
I was
just gonna be contrarian and be like, I forced my characters.
There you be contrarian.
I was going to say just one additional thing too. I'm glad we touched on this because my mind just kind of something sparks like we were talking about determinism a few minutes ago. That as we look at determinism, it's like the exact opposite of what like the sin that Paul touched on was in the early churches of Gnosticism, where the Gnostics were obsessed with the idea of like it's only the spiritual. We suspend any sort of idea that the physical has anything to do with our faith, and that it's just always seeking secretive knowledge, new revelations, things like that. And that's also an overcorrection outside of the reality of like we are existing within time and space of God's timeline, and both like how things are ultimately willed into place, but like how things are going to play out based on like, oh, it's objective that I'm going to, when I leave here tonight, I'm going to walk up these steps, and you know, I could either trip or I could walk outside the door just like normal, and it's
right. I think God has specific events that are going to happen no matter what, but how we get there is up to us to a certain extent. I have strong opinions about free will and Reformed theology, so feel free to come by and ask me later, and I'll tell you what I think on that one. But I think we've already hit the limit on that one.
Unless you're predetermined that, yes.
Right.
God's sake.
Let's move on to the next one then. So this one, it kind of gets into what we were just talking about, actually. It gets into more like, talks about free will. Obviously, we've already beat that one to like a dead horse, so we'll skip that one. But it also,
But does it dead horse
I think-
not free will?
yeah, I think Matthew
The
mentioned
horse is
this
dead
too.
or alive until you open the box. It's just,
Yeah. I think Matthew mentioned that as a finite person, we don't necessarily have the capabilities of understanding what an omniscient being can
Thank you.
understand, and that like, has anyone seen the movie The Butterfly Effect at all? Okay, Lauren, now we got one person.
No, I'm there too.
Okay, we got a few.
already next time.
There is a principle called the butterfly effect, and that thought that a butterfly flapping its wings in Africa can create a hurricane over the Atlantic. And the idea is, we don't know what actions will cause like the dominoes to fall later on exactly, but an omnipotent God can know that. And he can know how every situation is going to affect every other situation. And so the fact that we can't understand how anything good could possibly happen from any specific situation does not mean that God is not real or that God is not active in this world. That doesn't logically follow because we are finite, we can't possibly understand everything that God knows. And we don't have access even to all the information that God has. I do think if we did, we would just get mind overload and just start melting at that point. Just because there's so much going on at any one given moment. So that's a very, very shallow discussion on that one. We could go all night on that one. Again, just to get back to the idea of yours, it's extremely difficult to define what is evil. And Epicurus doesn't give us a good answer on that one. And so we have no idea where we would even judge to say, God, you crossed the line here, you should stop something. It's like, should God have stopped coffee from spilling in your lap? Should God have stopped when that person was murdered? It's like, where's the line?
Should God have stopped Jesus from being sacrificed on the cross? Right?
Yeah. It's like, where's the line
Yeah.
at this point? So you can see that the argument just kind of falls apart when you look at it this way. We'll go ahead and move on to the next one here. We're getting close to the end, guys, so hold on. But then this does go back a little bit to the free will, and that I will say that God's supreme ethic is love. Most theologians will argue that, and that the idea is that God created us to have a relationship with us, and you can't have a relationship with a robot. Like, that's not a real thing. For those who are married, like, if you came home and you clicked a button and your spouse kissed you, is that really love there? It's more like a robot at that point. Did you have a thought?
No.
Okay, I just thought you were saying that.
No, I have no.
I click a button, that happens to me, I'm still a Christian gentleman.
Right.
I would argue
Thank you.
If people are to be truly capable of loving God and in a relationship with Him, then they must have the free will to choose Him or not choose Him. And by not choose Him, I mean committing evil. And we all have sin, fallen nature, so we all do that. By not choosing God, people are capable of making evil decisions and actions, obviously. So is it justifiable to let people exist and not choose God? Think about it. If God stopped us when we did commit evil, there would be no one left on the earth, really. We all have, again, fallen natures, at least from the Christian perspective we do. And while we don't necessarily think we're doing it all the time, like, at some point we've all lied. At some point a lot of us has stolen. At some point a lot of us has cheated. And so, like, where do you draw the line? As far as if God is supposed to stop evil, where does He start interceding at? I know for me, He would have walked me out a long time ago. So that's our stand. That's obviously the Bible standard for objective morality. And everyone else, they can say, yeah, we don't like evil, but how do you define it? If you can't use the Christian perspective, what are you using for an objective perspective at that point? All right, this is our last slide here. Y'all made it. Let's read this one off real quick. Without a creator, there is no objective morality. Even moral every moral argument is merely a suggestion or opinion. It's not based on anything outside of that. Again, you could have the whole world believing, say you could force the whole world, in essence, to take on a moral stance, but that wouldn't necessarily make it objectively moral, because there's nothing outside of that, and you, honestly, you'd have extremely difficult time getting everyone to believe something. And from a moral perspective, it's just, everyone has different opinions. Many people who are not Christians live perfectly moral lives, but the question is, are they living it consistently with their beliefs? I'm not saying that anyone who's an atheist or any other religion, they can live perfectly moral lives, normal like me and you, but are they living consistently with what they claim to believe is the question. Something to think about. When it comes to morality, science is not capable of explaining morality to us. It can tell us how plants grow better because of this, but it can't tell us should we torture a baby or not. It's just not capable of telling us anything like that. For an atheist to be consistent, he must admit there is no such thing as evil or purpose for people. So that's why I say thank goodness there's a God. Again, to wrap this up, you can live the life and not have a picture of morality. It'll be difficult to be consistent, but you can do it. And this does not prove beyond a doubt that there is a God, but if it is logically consistent to say, because I believe there's objective morals, there is a God. And that's all I got. Thanks for coming out tonight, guys.